everybody, this is Luke from Expat Aviator and I'm back today with another S3 tutorial on emergencies. As always, this is designed for people who are training for their S3 or waiting to train for their S3 in VAT UK, but it should really apply to anybody. And of course, we have written the content ourselves, we're not endorsed by VAT UK, so there may be some mistakes. If you do spot any or you have any questions, let us know in the comments. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at the types of emergencies. We're then going to look at how to deal with them, which is using the ASSIST acronym. We're going to look at each bit of that in detail, and then just to finish off, we're just going to look at some examples. So, types of emergencies. A lot of people in VATSIM don't seem to realise that there's actually more than one type of emergency. So we have two. We have a PAN and a Mayday. A PAN is where there's a problem, but there's no immediate threat to life, and a Mayday is where there is a problem, and there's an immediate threat to life. Therefore, the Mayday being the more serious out of the two. If a pilot was to declare a PAN, it would go something along the lines of PAN, 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 Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, alternator failure, diverting to Manchester Barton. But that aircraft hasn't given us every detail, which you can check in Cap 413. There is a big list of what pilots are actually meant to report in an emergency. But to be quite honest, an emergency is that highly kind of stressful, and it's that non-standard that you probably won't get all that information. But the list is there. As you can see there, an alternator failure, so we know he is declaring an emergency, he has a problem, but there's no immediate threat to life on that aircraft with an alternator failure. The more serious one, the Mayday, would go something like Mayday, 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 Golf Alpha Bravo, Charlie Delta, engine fire, force landing 2 miles north of Pole Hill, 2 POB. We know from that, straight away, engine fire, there's going to be a serious threat to life with a fire on board an aircraft, hence the reason there's a Mayday. Again, we haven't got every detail we need, but we can ask for that later on. So let's move on to how to actually deal with an emergency then. So if you get either of those two transmissions on your frequency, these are the steps you need to take. So the first one is you need to acknowledge the emergency. So the RT for that would be call sign Roger Mayday or call sign Roger PAN. You can also add report intentions when able to the end of that if you like. It tends to be more of a personal preference thing and ultimately dependent on the situation as to whether you do it. Key thing to note here is that it's not Mayday acknowledged or PAN acknowledged. It's Roger Mayday or Roger PAN. So once you've acknowledged the emergency, you then have to go on to the next bit of the acronym, which is separate. So your main goal, really, as an air traffic controller, is to separate aircraft. That's what we're here for. And don't let that kind of slip just because you've got something that's a bit non-standard. So you have to look and think, right, I need to achieve separation with all my aircraft here. Now, the problem is with emergencies, they're very, very situation dependent, so we can't teach you a model that will work every time. That's why the ASSIST acronym is good, because it's kind of quite open. But these are just some generic points. So one of the things you'd look at is, do I let things continue on the ILS? So let's just say an aircraft's taken off with tower and they've declared an emergency. You haven't been told by tower yet all the details, but you see the squawk 7700 pop up and you go, okay, there's something wrong. Now let's say you've got aircraft that are about to turn to establish on the ILS. You have to make the decision there whether letting that aircraft continue and go into tower would be safe, or whether you then need to take it through the localizer and send it up to a hold. Equally, is putting a check in place necessary. So what a lot of VATSIM controllers seem to think is that they'll just tell tower when to stop departures. That's not what we do. Tower is responsible for their bit of airspace, the ATZ, so they're responsible for deciding what takes off. So you don't tell tower when to stop and start departures. What you do is you make sure they know about anything, and it's up to them when they think they need to stop. But what you can do is you can put a check in place. So let's think of a different situation. Let's just say an aircraft goes around, kind of turns a little bit, let's just say kind of run my heading-ish, and then says they have a problem, so they start making orbits just after they've gone around. Now, obviously that's going to be a problem, and you may not have the time straight away to coordinate with tower and kind of find out all the details, and it may take too long. So what you would do in that case, you wouldn't say to tower stop departures. What you would do is you just put a check on, so say check north. I'm going to look at checks and releases in another video. But the key thing to take away from that is not to tell tower to stop departures, give them the information, and if necessary, put a check on certain departures, just to ensure separation. The other thing is gaps on the ILS. So, most airports in the UK will be vectored into 6-mile gaps as a standard, with the exception of Manchester, Heathrow, Gatwick, and I think Essex. But yeah, you're looking at 6-mile gaps roughly. You then have to decide whether, especially between a Mayday kind of aircraft or a PAN, you're going to need increased gaps. So what we tend to say as a standard is 10 to 15 miles. So the aircraft that's in front of the Mayday or the PAN, there needs to be a 10 to 15 mile gap to that aircraft, and there also needs to be at least a 10 or 15 mile gap for the aircraft behind the emergency. That's just to give tower more room so that things can actually get off the runway in time. Because you obviously, if an aircraft declares an engine fire, let's say, most serious thing you can have, and you've put that aircraft behind another one 3 miles apart, there's a chance that that aircraft could go around, and that's definitely not what you want when you've got an engine fire. So we'll move on to the other bit of the acronym, the second S, which is silence. So again, this isn't a mandatory thing, which is a lot of controllers kind of seem to think it is. You don't have to silence your frequency. Pilots should actually stop transmitting themselves if they hear a mayday and only transmit if it's absolutely necessary to do so. Unfortunately, we are on VATSIM, and that doesn't always come through with some pilots. So it purely depends on the situation. You may want to stop people transmitting and tell everybody on the frequency to be quiet so that you have time to deal with your emergency. The RT for that would be all stations, Manchester Tower, stop transmitting, mayday, or PAN. Everybody should then stop transmitting unless there is an absolutely safety critical transmission that someone has to make. Once the emergency is either gone or the emergency is still there but your frequency is quieting down and you're happy for people to start talking again, you would take all stations, Manchester Tower, distress, traffic ended. Okay, that is the RT taken from Cap 413. And as that third bullet point says there, it isn't always necessary, so please just apply it based on the situation. The next bit of the acronym is inform. So first we've acknowledged it, we've then separated everything and made sure our frequency is okay. We've then considered putting silence on the frequency so that we have time to think and act. And then the fourth bit is inform. So informing people is obviously kind of an important one. We tend to say that coordinating with aerodrome is more important than area in general, because area will just see that if you start holding, they'll hold on top. They don't need to know straight away. So we tend to always coordinate with tower. Tower will then coordinate with ground and delivery. And then if you need to, you'll go and coordinate with area and just say, right, by the way, we are holding because of an emergency, blah, 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 blah. But that isn't always necessary. I've reiterated the fact there it isn't your responsibility to stop departures, so this is where the coordination aspect would come in, kind of linked to the separate bit with the checks. But the main thing I want to talk about with inform is the use of 7700. So again, almost a VATSIMism where everybody thinks that if you get a mayday or a PAN, you have to get that aircraft to squawk 7700 because it goes red on your screen. Most of the emergency real world, as far as I'm aware, don't actually squawk 7700. What 7700 does is basically the radar picks it up and realizes that it's a special code for an emergency. So it will override all the filters on the air traffic control system. So for lots of positions have altitude filters so they don't see every aircraft in the sky. Every single controller will see an aircraft squawking 7700. I believe Euroscope does the same thing, but I'm not entirely sure. But the use of 7700. So sometimes pilots just squawk it even though they're not actually meant to, unless they're told to. They will just do it. If they do, fine. But the thing you have to consider with 7700 is, do I need it? So I'm going to actually look at this from a tower perspective now. So let's say you're on tower, you have an aircraft take off and it declares an engine fire. Now, you know radar's really busy because you've just seen the amount of traffic that's coming in. You're busy because you've got a busy frequency. That's when a 7700 would be good. Because what it will do is, you instruct the pilot to 7700 when able. They'll do it as soon as they can. That means that then that red blip will show on radar's screen. They will see that and start acting on it before you've even told them about the aircraft. So it basically helps you delay your coordination. Or in other words, the 7700 is doing part of the coordination for you. So it just gives you a little bit more time. So that's what we use 7700 for. We don't use it just because it's a code for emergencies. So let's move on to the final S in the acronym, which is support. So again, this is more of a radar thing now than anything else, but give the crew options. As we'll look at when we look at the examples in the end, you'll hear the RT for this quite a bit. You'll hear controllers giving pilots other runways. So, for example, if an aircraft isn't exactly sure where they want to go, they're not familiar with the area, you can give them and say, by the way, Liverpool runway 09 is available if you want it. That's great. You know, if you have the landing distance available, even better. Just kind of, it purely depends on the situation, but give the crew a bit of support. Okay, give them the information you deem necessary. Now I'm going to link this onto the last bit of the acronym, which is time. So don't give them too much support. So what you've got to remember is an emergency in an aircraft is already a very high workload situation. That's when there are two qualified pilots. When you have a desk pilot who's probably by himself in the cockpit, trying to deal with something, especially like a fire or something, is going to be extremely high workload. So they don't want to have to keep talking to you. Now, again, we'll look at this one in an example at the end so I can explain it in a more practical way. But give the crew support, give them whatever you think is necessary, but don't talk to them constantly. Ultimately, they need time to sort their own stuff out. If they've made a decision, don't carry on giving them more options. Once they've made the decision, that's what they're going with. You just support them with that. So anyway, I mentioned examples, so let's have a look at these three. Because the videos are quite long, we're not actually going to look at them, so you can go and find these on YouTube. Speedbird 38, I'm sure a lot of people will know. It was the 777 a few years ago that crashed just short of 27 left on final at Heathrow. The RT on YouTube is about 2.5 minutes long. It's well worth a watch. We then have Speedbird 2276 or Speedbird 2276 Heavy, as the Americans called it. It was at Los Angeles, I believe, and it was again 777 with an engine fire on takeoff. Another one to watch out for. And Thompson 263 Hotel. So both the Speedbird accidents were handled very well by both the pilots and the controllers, which you can hear on the recordings. Thompson 263 Hotel was, I don't want to say not handled well, because of course I'm not a qualified controller, and that's kind of, a little bit weird me saying that it wasn't handled well. But the one thing, especially to take from the Thompson 263 Hotel, was that the radar controller was actually at Manchester, and they were offering a lot of support to the crew. And the crew had made the decision like 3 or 4 times that then they were going to return to 6 right as it was at Manchester. And the radar controller carried on saying Liverpool 09's available, the landing distance is. And they were like, no, we're going to go back. So that's a good example of kind of, the initial bit was great, but then you can see the support and time aspects in there. But anyway, that's all there is on emergencies. It does ultimately depend on the situation. So you're just going to have to try and kind of apply this, but the acronym will always work. So make sure you know that acronym inside out, review the concepts we talked about today, and then you should be able to deal with any type of emergency. Hope that's been useful, and look out for more videos. See you soon.